The French government has just announced that it rejects the junta's accusations and has published this document in which the junta gave France permission to fly the A400 over Niger on August 6. Nigeria seems to be backing down. It seems like that the domestic situation, the domestic political situation in Nigeria, which has the majority of the military power that ECOWAS contains. ECOWAS, you know, it's kind of like a West African EU, or at least that's like the idea. It hasn't been exactly perfect in the implementation process, but they have been threatening a military intervention in Niger. And they actually said that last Thursday, or I think it was Sunday, I believe it was Sunday, that Sunday was the deadline for the military junta that overthrew the democratically elected government in Niger to step down, so or they would use all options on the table, and they did include military intervention. Problem is, it seems that Nigeria, even though it has a much more powerful army than Niger, hell, even if you were to combine the militaries of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, which are the other countries that are backing up Niger, saying that they will come to Niger's aid, they are also military juntas that overthrew democratically elected governments. They are saying they will come to their aid, but even all of their armies combined are still not as strong as the military in Nigeria. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Nigerian military would be successful in a military operation, or that they would stay afterwards to stabilize the situation and stop terror groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda from flowing in. But it seems that the domestic political situation in Nigeria isn't progressing forward or towards war. Senators are objecting to the idea of invading and doing regime change in Niger. Civil society groups are rejecting it. There seems to be some public opposition amongst the Nigerian public, and it really looks like the linchpin of any military operation to go into Niger and replace the government. Nigeria, because they're the most powerful military state in ECOWAS, and this whole intervention idea was a Nigerian initiative. It was the Nigerian president, who's also the president of ECOWAS, at least for now, was pushing this idea forward. And so if Nigeria kind of backs off of it, or they look like they're backing off of it, then it's just not going to happen. Gambia isn't going to go remove them. Unless the French decide to do something crazy, it's not going forward. And unless something changes in the next 24 hours, because supposedly there's supposed to be another meeting this Thursday, tomorrow, between the leadership in Nigeria and ECOWAS to try to find a solution. They are intensifying sanctions, but it looks like, at least for now, they're not going through on their threat for what they were going to do last Sunday, that they were going to go and commit to a military intervention, or that was on the table. They haven't completely taken it off the table, but it looks like they're kind of, you know, they're teetering on the edge. They're starting to lean back once they face some opposition. Let's listen to what DW has to say.
Nigeria is pushing for a diplomatic solution to the coup in neighboring Niger. A spokesman for Nigerian President Bola Tinubu said he wanted to avoid military intervention. Nigeria will chair Thursday's meeting of the ECOWAS regional group in response to the coup leader's refusal to relinquish power. Africa's most populous nation has also increased financial sanctions on Niger in response to the coup. The military junta in Niger refused to receive an ECOWAS delegation for peace talks. Have the coup leaders...
This is an interesting part right here, is the other option that Nigeria is trying to use to save face is some off-ramp. Now, originally they were requesting the government to step down, that the military junta would step down and they would replace him back with Mohamed Bazoum, the democratically elected leader. The military junta, though, isn't even accepting ECOWAS diplomats in Niger anymore. They don't want to talk anymore. They seem settled on this, especially after all the sanctions with not only the intensification of sanctions from Niger, but them stopping trade from Nigeria stopping trade from transporting through Nigeria, which is how 60 to 7% of Niger's trade comes into Niger. They've stopped electricity from being transported into Niger, which is how Niger gets 70% of its electricity. Nigeria is a real powerhouse and an important trading partner, an important associate, I guess you could say, an important trading partner of Niger. And so by them cutting off that trade, by them cutting off the electricity, Niger government has responded to their boisterous claims of military intervention and these cutoffs by just not accepting any diplomats. And so the way that Nigeria could save face to get an off-ramp, unless something changes, either they come in with maybe a better entering offer or something else, they're not even accepting diplomats. So they're not looking to find an off-ramp. They've stuck into their position. Their position is they're in power, and that's that. And they'll figure out the future of Niger without Nigeria, without ECOWAS, without these people who are trying to meddle in the internal affairs of Niger. That is what the military junta's argument is. Now, I don't know if Nigeria can really save face here if they can't find an off-ramp, which could push certain members of the Nigerian government to say, look, if they won't even accept an off-ramp, then we have to do military intervention, while internal criticism against a military intervention in West Africa continues to rise within the country. More interest groups speak out, and more senators clearly state that they're not going to give their support to an intervention in Niger when there's so many different economic problems within Nigeria, when Nigeria has their own internal security problems with organizations like Boko Haram. And so a lot of Nigerians are looking at the situation like, look, we got our own economic problems, our own economic woes, and we've got Boko Haram within our country engaged in terrorism, trying to control territory. And instead of dealing with that issue and concentrating solely on that issue, you want to deal with this coup in Niger. And a lot of Nigerians say, nah, I don't want to do that. Now, others see the multiple coups that have happened in West Africa as of recent, the one in Burkina Faso, the one in Mali, and now the one in Niger, which all happened within 3 years of each other. And they're concerned about the encroachment of the military on democracies in West Africa, which has a lot of fragile democracies who are suffering from a lack of democratic maturity. If democracies are not old and they're new, if it's a new institution that is still finding a way to get its footing and get its foot on the ground and establish a cultural norm of respecting the electoral process and not interrupting it and respecting these institutions, this is a very fragile time period for any developing democracy. And so other developing democracies in the region, and Nigeria has had its own history with military intervention when it comes to, political statecraft, there's a concern, not only domestically for some Nigerians, but also for the rest of West Africa, as this could continue to expand. And they don't want to give military dictatorships throughout the region any inspiration. I mean, not military dictatorships, but militaries across the region any inspiration. But it seems like the general climate internally in Nigeria is against a military intervention, despite what some people, as I just described, are saying in Nigeria and others in West Africa think. The majority of the consensus seems to be against it outside of the presidency of Nigeria, which so happens to be also the president of ECOWAS. So they're in a tough position here. So I think this might end as many of these other military coups end. And I don't want to make too many heavy predictions, but listen to this and tell me if this sounds like a possibility that is likely. And we'll see in a few months or a few weeks, whenever this is settled, whether or not it becomes like an indefinite thing. Relations between Nigeria and Niger are broken down permanently until there's a change in leadership in Niger. Who knows? But tell me if this sounds like a possibility. Nigeria fails to remove the government in Niger due to a lack of want for military intervention in Nigeria, and the French being unwilling to intervene on their own to protect the linchpin of French anti-terrorism operations in West Africa, because they don't want to do it without a partner on the ground. So a military intervention does not happen. The government in Niger being unwilling to accept a delegation because of all of the, the ramp up and the fear around military intervention from the ones in the junta, which of course want to protect their wealth, they want to protect their power. They've cut off relations, and of course because of the sanctions. So they're entrenched in their position. And in order to restart a conversation, Nigeria and ECOWAS lowers their position through some back channel, maybe not publicly because they don't want it to be too humiliating. And then they negotiate for the release of Mohamed Bazoum, who is still being detained by the junta, who is released into the international community. Maybe he starts some government in exile. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he accepts defeat. Who knows? They negotiate his release. Maybe they keep some sanctions in place to make sure that other militaries in the region know that it will come with consequences. And then that's that. I mean, maybe it won't only be just like normal economic sanctions, but continuing continuing to stop electricity from going across the border. But that's the general idea. It's looking more likely that we get something vaguely resembling that than a situation like 2012, 2013 French intervention against the terror groups that were marching on the capital of Mali. We're not going to get another operation like that, at least a French-led operation like that. So unless Nigeria ramps up and goes through with this, and so far it seems like they don't have a game plan, they're still not ready to go, which suggests to me that unless there's a real change amongst the Senate leadership in Nigeria or something else, that they're probably going to have to compromise to some degree, either for Mohamed Bazoum's release, or this is going to be an indefinite kind of frozen diplomatic stalemate. So I think that those are the most likely situations going forward. Now, that doesn't mean a military intervention is impossible. It could very much still happen. It is still a real possibility. But after that timeline was met, and there is still not a cohesive strategy in Nigeria on how to move forward on this, that suggests they're a lot more wishy-washy than the Nigerian government's immediate kind of, this is what you will do, we will enforce it through other means possible, like that type of tough rhetoric at the start. They're just not willing to deliver on it, which is going to degrade the credibility of Nigeria's word diplomatically moving forward. If, for example, there was to be another military coup, say it was maybe not in Niger, but it was in, I don't know, somewhere like Gambia, Senegal, who knows, right? Just another military coup. Let's say it's another ECOWAS member state, so it's going to be of a concern because the last three were ECOWAS member states. If they feel like, okay, now this is the fourth one and we need to intervene, any threats they make then, they're just going to remember, hey, remember that time they made that threat and nothing came of it? It'll probably just be the same situation. And now, instead of being backed up by Mali and Burkina Faso, they're going to be backed up by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Of course, don't catastrophize the situation. You don't want it to we don't want to treat this like we treated Vietnam, like, oh no, if this falls and this will fall, then this will happen, and a domino effect. I don't want to inspire that in the population, but these are the thoughts that Nigerian politicians are having right now about these different possibilities. Now, putting that aside, we'll have to wait until the meeting Thursday, the meeting tomorrow, to really know for sure where they're going to go from here. If they don't have a game plan by the end of tomorrow, then it's just a complete mess. I do want to cover one other thing. Al Jazeera covered this. I don't necessarily like using Al Jazeera for news segments that much, but I didn't see another news source covering this specific story right here. The government in Niger, the military junta, is accusing France of violating their airspace with French military aircraft. And from the reports that I'm hearing, it seems like French aircraft were in Niger's airspace. But France wants to add a little bit to the picture, add a little piece of information that is not being included by the junta in Niger. Let's listen to the story.
Niger's coup leaders are accusing French troops of carrying out a plan to destabilize the country. They say French forces released rebel fighters. Now, France has more than 1,000 soldiers in Niger as part of a mission against armed groups.
The Council wishes to announce the extremely serious events that are underway in Niger due to the behavior of French forces and their accomplices on our territory. Indeed, today at around 6:30 a.m., a position of the Niger National Guard was attacked 30 kilometers from the Samaria gold site. At this moment, the toll is not yet established.
Emin Idris is following developments for us from Abuja in neighbouring Nigeria.
According to the spokesman of the military leaders in Niger, the incident happened today, this morning, around 6:30 in the morning in the Tillabéri region. This is an area where we've seen a lot of activity, militant activity from groups linked with Al-Qaeda and ISIL. And what they're saying actually was that a French aircraft took off from a neighboring country in West Africa, in Central Africa, and then cut off all communications. And they think that the French are involved in this. But again, some analysts believe that this is an area where we've seen a lot of activity from groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. And this was feared since day one of the coup, that some members of the armed groups in the region may take advantage of what's happening. So it's not clear yet whether or not the attack was carried out by the French or by armed groups that have been busy in the area called Tillabéri in Niger.
So there was a fear of this, like the guy said, since the start of the coup, that there is a territory of extremist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or affiliates at least, in Niger. It's not as bad as it is in Mali, where basically the entire north of the country is awash in terror groups, or in Burkina Faso. And some would even point to the fact that Niger had a democratically elected government in Mohamed Bazoum, and that his government was actually dealing with the situation well enough, much better than how the military juntas that had overthrew their governments in order to try to, according to them, tackle this issue, they had failed to do so. Now, I don't want to 100% just praise Mohamed Bazoum as some fantastical leader or anything, but I do want to point that out, especially since the leadership of this new military junta actually said in January of, I believe it was last year or early this year, that the government was tackling the issue of extremism. And if it was this year, no, it was this year. It was about 7 months ago. They were saying that they were tackling the issue quite well. That was until, somebody's job was threatened behind closed doors, or at least that's what the rumor is, that the head of the presidential guard, Tachani, had his job threatened, and so then he needed to create this crisis. But that's a rumor. That's not confirmed. We don't know that 100%. We don't have some documents, but that is the rumor that is going around. So they're saying that the French are supporting these terror groups or these rebel groups against the government of Niger in order to destabilize the country, so maybe they could go in and intervene and try to do something and try to, the quote unquote, maybe do a regime change or intervene or make a justification to intervene. Now, first off, if there is a changing of the hands like this, a coup where the government is overthrown, instability is going to be a natural byproduct of that. And terror groups love chewing on and feasting on that type of instability. So it is 100% plausible, and I would even say likely, that when these terror groups found out that there was a military coup in Niger, and that there was going to be instability and there's going to be confusion about who's in control on the ground and how well this government is being supported by the international community, they're going to take advantage of that. If these terror groups are like, wait, those 1,000 American soldiers that were training the army and doing all these things, they were on the ground, they're no longer going to do anything. They're not going to support us on the ground. They're not going to support them on the ground. Oh, those 1,500 French troops. Oh, the French aircraft. Oh, those EU provided stuff. They're not going to do anything. Oh, aid is being taken out. People's power is going out. People don't know who's exactly in control. We don't know how stable the government is. This is an environment that any terror group would want to take advantage of. And so unless the government in Niger provides evidence that the French were all of a sudden, even though it was motivated in 2012 and 2013 to intervene in Mali in order to counter these types of organizations, that they have switched sides apparently and are now supporting these organizations to destabilize Niger. They would have to provide some hefty evidence, or really any evidence whatsoever, because that would be a gigantic claim. That would be the geopolitical scandal of the century for the French. But when it comes to the aircraft in their airspace, the French responded to this by posting a document. The French government has just announced that it rejects the junta's accusations and has published this document in which the junta gave France permission to fly the A400 over Niger on August 6. It was signed by the putschist, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it, but by the mutineer, General Barmou himself. Here's the document. And here's the guy that signed it. Now, I mean, is it possible that this was forged by the French to make the now, couped illegitimate government of Niger look more illegitimate, like, oh, they're lying, they're just fibbing, just telling a tall tale. I mean, it's possible, but that would only deepen whatever like political scandal would have been if they had violated the airspace and didn't deny it with fake documents. Odds are that these are real documents signed by the junta. And now the junta, and this is a possibility, again, this is guesswork. The junta could be experiencing instability because they overthrew the government, and running an army and running a state is not the same thing, something they're going to have to realize, something that the governments in Mali and the people of Mali and Burkina Faso are slowly, painstakingly realizing, something that Charles de Gaulle even had to realize. You can't run an economy like an army. They all will have to realize that statescraft and being the head of the presidential guard are two very different things. Getting international support for anti-terrorism operations, that's important. Keeping your economy afloat, that's important. Keeping the country stable, that's important. And coups don't produce stability. They might be feeling that instability now, and as the terror groups are taking advantage of it, they don't want to say, oh, well, the terror groups are gaining ground because there was a coup. Because who did the coup? It was them. They don't want to take the blame. So it was the French. The French actually supplied the terrorists and helped the terrorists to expand and attack us to delegitimize our government authority. So far, it's just a tall tale. It's not impossible. It's just very, very unlikely. Would be a gigantic scandal, and they should provide some evidence of, because the French are providing documentation that they're lying. Anyway, the situation continues. French planes in Niger's airspace, they're mad. They are certainly mad. But did they give them permission? The French seem to think so.